Hello, everybody. I am here talking about Final Fantasy X. Ah, man. This is my favorite Final Fantasy game, and I think a lot of people do think it's their favorite. They either love 10 or 7. And I think also, I mean, the most popular one right now is 14 because that's the MMO one that actually works, unlike 11. But I think, yeah, people's favorites are either 10 or 7, and 10 is definitely my favorite, mainly because of the story, and it's really, really interesting. So what can I say about 10? Well, first off, what's different about 7 is that it's strictly turn-based. There's no ATB system, so there's no bar you need to attack. Everything is very strategic and kind of old school. Again, you have the rough kind of mini map. The game itself is not really super advanced, but it's still, you have invisible enemies on the screen when you encounter them. You just run into them. But the story really for Final Fantasy VII is very amazing. But mechanically, it just you have attack, magic. And the only big difference is that in 7, when anyone could use any materia and there were no restrictions, here you have very specific kind of magic users. For example, Lulu is going to start off with she's your black mage, your destruction magic, and Titus and Waka are kind of your offensive physical magic. Oh, sorry, a physical attack rather. And what's really interesting is that the way the level up system works is that you always do automatically level up, but you also have this sphere grid. And on the sphere grid, you kind of have, all these spheres in a circle, and each one of these points on the grid is a certain skill. And in order to get a certain skill, you have to learn other certain skills and essentially go in order in order to get the thing you want and plot it out. What's really interesting about this concept, though, is that, technically speaking, any character can learn any other skill from any other character. So if you play the game long enough and you keep leveling up, eventually Titus can learn to use magic like Lulu, or Waka can learn to use Titus's attacks and special effects. And all this other really kind of nifty, cool stuff. And I actually saw this analysis video that it makes sense narratively that essentially the characters will learn from each other and learn essentially the different techniques by spending time with each other, and that actually does make a lot of sense. So that's basically an overview of the mechanics. You now have a very clear view of also when the enemy's going to attack using this special little preview panel, which shows the order of when whoever is going. So even though it's turn-based, you know exactly what is going to happen and who you need to buff or defend or whatnot. But that is the mechanics of Final Fantasy X, but let's get into the story. The story is really, really interesting, and honestly, at the beginning, all over the place. Like, the beginning to this game, I didn't realize it because I was watching it recently. It is actually frankly insane. It is actually what the hell is going on, and there's just a lot of things that happen in this game which don't make any sense. Like, at first, it's all explained later, but usually they give you a little thing, a little, like, maybe a preview of something in the future, and then they throw you into the main game. That happens like 3 times. First you're in Zanarkand, then you're like thrown into the past, then you're in the ocean, then you're abducted by like the friggin' pirates and Riku, and then you escape that, and then you wash up on the shores of Besaid Island, and then the game starts. I might have missed something there, but it's honestly insane. It's like, what is going on? What am I doing? And it has no explanation. But I'm really glad I kept going past that first hour or so, because then the game finally begins to make sense. So, in this world of Spira, well, initially, it's interesting. This game uses a lot of... I'm not sure if foreshadowing is the right term, because it's kind of like there are a bunch of future events that are taking place that are linked to the past events. So, for example, the main character, Titus, he lives in this hyper sophisticated, futuristic city called Zanarkand. And he's a blitzball ball player. We'll get into that later. But it's this very stupid kind of, I don't even know what to call it, this stupid thing where you just kick a ball around. It's like everyone hates blitzball, and there's a blitzball minigame in this game, and everyone hates it, and it sucks. So essentially, he's in this highly advanced society. This giant attack happens by this giant tidal wave and this monster, and while it plays this heavy rock music, and you're just like, okay, this is happening now, I guess. And then suddenly, you're thrown into a completely different dimension. However, when you're in this new world, essentially, what transpires is that Zanarkand still exists, but it's an ancient holy land that was destroyed 1,000 years ago. So already you have a very interesting premise as to exactly what is going on in this world, along with the fact that some of the characters know more than they let on. And the characters in this game are the other great thing that I love about Final Fantasy X from a narrative perspective is that in a lot of these cutscenes, Titus will be speaking from a future viewpoint, and it'll be speaking of the past, saying, "Oh, back then we only knew so little before things got really bad, and we were so naive and stuff like this." And Titus himself is kind of a derpy character. Like, he's very much the equivalent of like the ultimate twink. Like, he's just dumb and like friendly and kind of naive and stupid. And it's so interesting that you have this narrative from his future self, which is so much more mature and advanced and interesting, that you just want to see where the story goes, to know how does this character develop into this other character that's speaking. It's a really interesting mechanic or aspect of storytelling that reminds me almost of Star Wars, how the fact that, they made 3 movies and then 3 prequels, and a big reason why people would watch those prequels is to see how does Obi-Wan become Obi-Wan, how does this character become this character, and so on. Like, how do they connect? And that's really interesting. So that is kind of the lore of the world from the initial standpoint of the game. But what takes place after that? Well, you meet the local villagers of the village who kind of take you in. And what happens is you meet this summoner named Yuna. And Yuna is to go on this giant quest to defeat the entity known as Sin. And Yuna is very specialized because as a summoner, she can essentially summon the elements of the world and these basically like gods or deities to fight on her behalf. And so it's been a tradition every 1,000 years. The head summoner from this island has to travel to the end of the world at Zanarkand and basically defeat this beast. And it's like a tradition that happens every 1,000 years or something, and banish it but never fully destroy it, which is super, super interesting. So there's definitely some like maybe some perhaps Christian mythology here just from the name alone. Another very cool thing is that the summoner's other job also is to send out souls to the other side. So it's this weird, really weird thing where people will die, and a bunch of people do die in the beginning of the game from this giant hurricane, but their souls are still inside their bodies or something. And so Yuna has to perform this thing called the Sending. And in the Sending, she does a dance with her rod in the water, along with music, and then the souls actually leave their bodies as these little orbs, and they go to the other side. It's a really interesting spiritual component that you just don't see in games. And I think that's why I do love 10 so much, is that it's very, very spiritual. And so the main layout of the game is you go from place to place, area to area, essentially defeating, going into the temple, finding the the god or the icon, defeating it, and then adding it to your roster like a Pokemon, because then of course Yuna can summon them and they can help you fight other enemies in the game. And of course, what's very interesting is that by the end of the game, the amount of icons you have, even the optional ones you can get, allow you to deal more damage to the final boss. And the entire concept of what the final boss is just a super interesting concept. Mainly because it relies on the other spirits to take on its form and defeat them. Therefore, as you sacrifice your icons, it becomes easier to defeat Sin through your efforts. So the more you sacrifice, the easier the end game is. Just really interesting conceptual stuff. This whole game is a fascinating story. One of the most interesting things I've ever played. It definitely is up there with the best Final Fantasies, and definitely my favorite. Another reason why this is also absolutely my favorite Final Fantasy is the music. I think 10 has the best music. Yes, more than 7. From Besaid Islands to the Zanarkand theme to Mount Gagazet. This game is just filled with great music, and really fascinating music, and a really fascinating story. Of course, another thing that people will point out in this game is it is also infamous for its laughing scene, which in context makes about as much sense out of context. Essentially, Yuna is being depressed and sad about her journey, and Tidus, being the dumb twink he is trying to cheer her up, and says, "Oh, well, just laugh, Yuna." And he does this forceful laugh, and that's what that whole scene is based on. And trying to force her to laugh to the point where they do actually laugh. It's such a weird moment in the game that was like, okay, this is bizarre, I guess. There's also other aspects to the game that just, I don't know. I mean, there's this whole thing where Yuna is abducted and like tried to be married to this weird antagonist guy who just wants her, and his name of all names is Seymour. And he has this giant blue anime hairdo. It's just I don't know. I know 10 is just really interesting in a lot of ways. But it is very mystical, and I think the Hymn of the Faith, which is the main theme that Yuna kind of hums or sings when she does the sending, really like cemented this game to me as like, this is going to be my kind of game. Anything with hymns and sort of crypto-religious themes are just always super interesting to me. In my opinion, superior. It's also funny, I just remembered or realized that this game released around the same time as Kingdom Hearts 2. Kingdom Hearts 1, actually. And what's very funny about that game is that in the tutorial level of Kingdom Hearts, I'm not sure if people remember this, but you actually have the entire cast, or most of the cast of Tidus, Wakka, and I think Riku or Yuna? I'm not sure which one, on the island, and they have to you have to beat them at races and stuff, and it's just a weird thing that they just decided, yeah, let's include this in our other RPG. We'll have like chibi kid versions of these other characters for no reason. It's like, okay, sure, why not? And oh god, maybe I should have said it in my Final Fantasy VII review, but Cloud and Sephiroth are also in the Kingdom Hearts series, which are just weird in general. And again, even Cloud in that game looks completely different from the other Cloud. But anyway, I digress. Tidus is just the biggest idiot of all time. And speaking of Blitzball, I think the one thing that makes everyone absolutely hate Blitzball is that when you get to it, it's like mandatory that you have to do it for the story, that you have to win the tournament and then proceed. And the problem is that essentially you have to read all of these diagrams and all these charts, and everything in this little thing forces you to read paragraphs and paragraph of text of how to win Blitzball, when I'm pretty sure, as I recall, you just mash a bunch of buttons to win. You just basically, mash it until you score a goal and win, and everything else is just stupid. You try strategy, and it turns out brute force just wins the day, which is just... Also, it's funny that Waka also talks in like a Caribbean Jamaican accent all the time and ends everything he says with "ya." It just such a funny, interesting character that is part of this world. Another interesting quirk about Final Fantasy X is that most of the game it is voiced and it's done in-game or in-engine graphics. However, there are certain points where you'll get these CG cutscenes, and suddenly the characters look nothing like what they do in the normal game, and you can just tell like all the budget went to making this one explosion or this one cutscene. Like they are just insane about it, pushing the cutscene power of the game to the max, which is really funny because at this point games have kind of plateaued graphically, and a gameplay cutscene discrepancy isn't really that huge, but back then it was, and Square was really competing to have like the best graphics for their series. That's how they did market their games at that time. Again, the ending of this game, there's multiple twists. It's amazing, and oh my god, who you find is who's really behind everything, this tradition. Again, it's all very spiritual. There's no they're kind of a conspiracy, but it's not for the gain of anything material. It's all very spiritual. It's very cool. The big component though is Tidus's relationship with his father, and how his father was kind of absent from his life, and how his dad's theme actually is the heavy metal theme in the game. And again, I just love that aspect to it. It's so interesting and fun. And I remember playing the final boss section like at 1 a.m. and just being immersed in this world. It's so cool. Again, 10 is a fairly long game, but I would say it was my favorite story out of any Final Fantasy I've played. Closer up, it might be some of the expansions like Shadowbringers 14, but 10 is my favorite story. It is just honestly too good. And in typical Final Fantasy fashion, it has chocobos, it has other kind of races. You get an airship at the near the end. It has all the kind of staples, and the cast of characters is really great. Unparalleled, the character Auron in this game is my absolute favorite, bar none. He is the coolest. He's like an aloof samurai kind of figure, and you don't really know what his deal is, but you basically find out slowly what he does. I think the fact that he keeps one arm holstered in his samurai sleeve so that he doesn't have to exert it when he has to use his sword arm is just the coolest. He's just a badass. He's just friggin' cool. There's nothing else I have to say about it. Compared to Waka, who uses a friggin' beach ball. Even when you're fighting like the demigods at the end of the Netherrealm, Waka is still throwing like a demon beach ball at them, which is just still the funniest thing. The game is just good. It's just really good. And the only unfortunate thing, if you do want to play it today, you have to get pretty much, if it's not on PS2, you have to get the HD version on PS3 or PS4. And the issue with that is that they just messed up a lot of textures and lighting. Like they always do this with every remaster, called the HD Texture Edition or something. And of course they screw it up visually. So it's just like, all right, whatever. Yeah, you basically can't win them all, but yeah, this is just what we have to deal with, and yeah, there's not much else to say about it. I love this game; it has one of the best stories available, and I cannot wait to see what comes next from the Final Fantasy series. But this is the peak for me. Anyway, guys, I will see you later, and please enjoy this epic RPG. Bye.